Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Richard Oelberger, who is currently wrapping up his first book called Checking In. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Paul.
Are you ready to get started?
I am indeed.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Well, when you ask me this question, I want to keep it succinct, but I have a practical answer and then I have an emotional answer, and I think they're both important. First thing is you got to schedule time. That in a busy world that we're in with so many competing demands, that there has to be a set time, even if you have only 30 minutes, 4 days a week, and if it's the same time of day, that is what worked for me, that somehow the brain responds to knowing that it's okay to kind of drop down and focus in on whatever topic or outline you have in front of you, your vision statement. So schedule time would be the first piece of advice, and it's not to be taken lightly, because every week that there's time spent writing on the book, it builds confidence, like other work we do with athletes, where it sends a message saying, I am an author, I'm writing. You know, when people say, what are you doing? You can say, well, I'm a first-time author working on a book. So when weeks go by, or when it's the frequency is not there and it's not consistent, it can lead to lack of confidence or feeling like it's hard to get the momentum back. And the second part of that is put your passion first. That it has to be something you're writing about that means a lot to you, and that you feel passionate about releasing it. Similar to your question to me about when would you like this to be out there? Who's your target audience? Some of the other pre-work you do in becoming an author maybe should be up on a wall in front of you to keep you guided towards that weekly process. So sitting down, slotting time. Former guests I had on my show have said maximum an hour a day is what I've heard, just as a way of being like, not too much pressure, not overwhelm associated with it, just enough to keep the ball rolling.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
For me, because even though this is my first book in 10 years, I did have a book right out of grad school, and so that aligns with your question in that finding an editor or a publisher that you trust and that their vision aligns with your goals is very important. Because when I came out of grad school, I was just eager to get published, and the book was taken and made into kind of a textbook, and therefore it's not easily accessible. So I didn't reach people in quite the degree that I wanted to, and my interests were then taken and put into kind of a theoretical format rather than to a practical, accessible text that people could utilize for learning. In that case, it was more about spirituality and psychology. So finding a publisher that has the same vision, knows that what you're trying to do with the book, and has your best interests in mind, and that you feel they value the product that you're putting out there and the intention behind it. I think it's hard, but it's worth it to stick to your intuition of what you're seeking and what you're really intending with your book, so as to not lose control or lose the power of your vision.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you are planning to use in your book launch that you feel is going to work well.
Sure, it's a great question, Paul. Two things that have worked for me, which I think are very apropos to the current era. One is I used an ebook promo. I used that through Instagram, And anybody who comes to my site to this day who joins the Richard Listens site can get a free copy of the ebook, which were 5 tips that get you ready for your next high-pressure moment. So I think it's a way that I can reach the viewers that are interested in the subject matter, which is sports psychology and performance psychology. And it also helps them get a sense of who I am. So I think it's a great way, and it's something that's easily shared, that if other people said, you might like this or you might learn from these 5 tips, it can easily be something that people, with a few clicks on their phone, forward to friends or share, and can easily get access to. The other thing, because I have a Richard Listens podcast of my own, is promos on the podcast. I think constantly using that media to show I have a book coming out, to talk about what's going to be on it, and to reach my viewers in that way kind of gets people excited and gives them a lead up, and really wants to then also acquire, lists of names and people who might be interested. So I'm doing the work before the book is actually released.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
It was a great question. It's totally maybe not tied to anything, and I probably read it when I was 17 years old, but my favorite, On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which I believe was written probably in the 1960s. But the number one thing I learned from it, different than my upbringing, which was very logical and very practical, was about the life of adventure. It was written in a way where sensation, experience, everything from the way it feels to drive in a car in the wind to hit you in the hair, to the views of the California coast up by Big Sur, to the descriptions of each of the characters and people that interacted or met, even for a scene or a brief interaction in text. So it was very vivid, and it created a lot of imagery. And so for me, that's helped me as a writer to not get too technical, not to allow things just to be written from a perspective of someone who has a college degree, but to connect to people in a way where they can savor it and relate it to their own experience.
And could you tell us the name of that book one more time, please?
The book is called On the Road, and the author is Jack Kerouac. And he has a whole sequence of books, including Town in the City and several others, but that one is, I think, his seminal text.
Excellent. And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote is by a gentleman named Chaim Potok, and it is, "Art begins when someone interprets. When someone sees the world through his own eyes. Art happens when what is seen becomes mixed with the intent of the person who sees it."
Well, Richard, I want to thank you for being a guest on this show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Thanks, Paul. My website is richardlistens.com. Through Facebook, it's Facebook/Richard Listens. That's more of my page where you can see some of my former guests, sites of me in the field, Twitter @Richard Listens, and lastly, Instagram @Richard Listens. And you'd be happy to, you can see promos of my upcoming shows as well as the book when it's getting ready to release shortly, and find best ways to contact me or come see me in my office if you ever need it.
Richard, thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. Looking forward to it, and looking forward to speaking with any of your authors down the line if they need a resource. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.